Joining me now is Senator Elizabeth Warren, the Democrat who is part of the Senate abortion briefing today. Senator Warren, it's great to see you. Thanks for making the time. I find these stories from these women absolutely wrenching, and I wonder how you think they may be changing what we think of as a traditionally partisan landscape when it comes to reproductive freedom.
You know, I think what has happened in the past 18 months since an extremist Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade has been like getting smacked in the face day after day after day after day after day. Back when Roe was in place, sure, there'd been a lot of efforts to chip away at it, but people had thought about abortion rights as something that we were guaranteed. They'd been there for nearly half a century. The Supreme Court had spoken. That was what America wanted, and that's what America had. And then Donald Trump manages to get an extremist Supreme Court in place. They overturn Roe, and we watch day after day as another aspect unfolds. A 10-year-old who needs an abortion and can't get it in her state. A mother who desperately wants a baby, but understands that this fetus in her is badly deformed and she needs an abortion. Another mother whose life is at risk, and doctors stand beside her saying, is she close enough to death for us to give her an abortion under local laws? So it's watching the reality unfold, piece at a time, piece at a time, piece at a time. And it's watching it unfold with a neighbor, with a sister, with a cousin, with a friend, so that it's spread across America. And we have truly come to see what it means to live in Donald Trump's America, where politicians decide who gets access to abortion rather than doctors and patients.
You know, I think it's remarkable that you call it Donald Trump's America, because it is, in fact, of course, the Supreme Court that he shaped that overturned Roe v. Wade. But Donald Trump has somehow managed to kind of skate on both sides of the issue here by being very unclear as to be indecipherable, his position on abortion.
No.
My question for you is he, I mean, but is he going to get asked the tough question here? I mean, it's unclear if he's going to have, if there are going to be debates in the general election season. I mean, and thus far,
Alex,
go ahead. Yeah.
We don't need to ask him this question. I think that is absolutely the wrong way to frame this. He proudly put this Supreme Court in place. He proudly screened them for their position on abortion. And he is responsible for the state of abortion in this country right now. He is responsible for the fact that 20 states make it virtually impossible for someone who needs an abortion to get access. He is responsible for the fact that now these courts may take away mifepristone, for example, and undermine access to abortion in California and Massachusetts and Washington State and Oregon and all of the places that have protected abortion. Donald Trump is responsible. I don't need a question to him. I don't need a debate from him. I don't need a clear statement from him. The facts are the facts. He is responsible, and abortion will be on the ballot in 2024.
And I hear you on that. I am just going off the fact that 44% of caucus goers who do not support a federal abortion ban supported Donald Trump. He won on that issue. So clearly, I mean, the facts are the facts, but somehow they're not being communicated to certain sections of the American electorate.
But let's remember, those caucus goers are Republican caucus goers who showed up in Iowa in the middle of freezing weather to say, no matter what, I'm going to get there. And a big hunk of them said, I'm going to support Donald Trump no matter what. I do not think this means he can pull the wool over the eyes of the rest of America, of the people who are out on the streets marching over abortion, over the people who showed up in Kansas and the people who showed up in Michigan, the people who said, you give us a chance to vote on abortion and we will make certain that access to abortion is protected. So I'm not worried. Donald Trump is responsible, and I believe, regardless of what hardcore Republicans are going to do, I believe the rest of America is going to hold him responsible, and it's going to be one of many reasons that Donald Trump is going to lose in November.
Are you confident that if the Republicans gain the Senate, and it's not exactly a favorable map in 2024, that they are not going to do Donald Trump's bidding or the bidding of hardcore anti-choice conservatives should they regain control of the upper chamber?
Oh, I think that if the Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and please no, but if that happened, I don't think there's any doubt. They're going for a nationwide abortion ban. They've made that clear. Mitch McConnell stood up and said as much. And many of them say that part, the quiet part, out loud. And they understand it is unpopular, so they don't want to be too overt about it. But they're looking for a nationwide abortion ban. And keep in mind the other half. So long as we don't make Roe versus Wade the law of the land, these courts can continue to undermine access to abortion everywhere in the country. This decision that came out of a court down in Texas that may take mifepristone off the market. Keep in mind, a place like Massachusetts, about 50% of all abortions in Massachusetts are medication abortions. They use mifepristone. And what they're trying to do is to say that wouldn't be available not just in the 20 states that have banned abortion, it wouldn't be available anywhere in the United States. So the attacks on abortion rights that the Republicans are putting forward is both legislative, it's both at the state and federal level, and it's at the courts. In other words, wherever you are in America, if you care about abortion rights, if you care about protecting the right of people to have access to abortion, understand this. Donald Trump and the Republicans are coming for you. And your chance to beat that back comes in November 2024 when you vote down not just Trump, but every other Republican on the ballot.
Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, thank you for your time tonight.
You bet.